I'm not lucky in the conventional sense. I realize that I'm a middle class white guy born at the height of the great American empire. So I realize I'm fortunate in that regard. But if it has anything to do with chance, a dice roll, a card deal, a name out of a hat, anything like that, I will lose. Count on it. I stopped playing Dungeons and Dragons very early because I got tired of dying in the first 10 minutes on a roll of a 20-sided die and sitting there watching everybody else play. So it was so bad and so reliable that I literally gave up any kind of game of chance by the time I was 30. If I bought raffle tickets, it was because I was donating to the charity, not because I expected to win the TV. And then in 2009, I found out why I was so unlucky. That whole year, I felt awful. Not in any kind of way I could locate. Not sick, just tired, winded, climbing steps, just exhausted all the time. And my wife convinced me to go to the doctor, and he sent me for some tests. And a month or two went by, and I didn't hear back. And eventually I called the doctor, and he said they'd screwed up the tests, and I needed to go back. I ended up taking these tests 3 more times. And each time, the doctor told me that they screwed up the tests. So now I'm thinking, he's getting paid per test. So I ask him, when you say that the tests are screwed up, what do you mean by that? He says, well, let me put it this way. If these were your actual blood counts, you'd be dead. So he tells me to take another round of tests, but just in case, he says, if you start bleeding uncontrollably, go right to the ER, which was pretty unnecessary since my default plan, whenever I bleed uncontrollably, is to go to the ER. And wouldn't you know it, the very next day, I get a nosebleed that will not stop. And I end up in the ER. And they run more tests. But this time they say, oh, we're keeping you here. Turns out all of the tests I've had over those months were right. I was almost dead. It was a pretty rare type of leukemia. And when I found out, I did what everybody else does and what people should be very careful doing. I Googled it. Now, it turns out about 80% of what's on the internet about cancer is bullshit. And from what I can find out about my particular form of leukemia is that the only treatment for it is essentially put your head between your legs and kiss your ass goodbye. One of the articles on the internet basically actually said, get your affairs in order. Now, the hospital where I was diagnosed is a small one, and they tell me they need to send me to a bigger place for treatment. So they put me in an ambulance, and they tell the driver to just start driving south towards Center City, Philadelphia, and they will call with the destination. See, it's really busy, and whatever hospital has the first open bed, that's where I'm going. Now, here's what I didn't know at the time. Like many people, I was under the impression that if one hospital has a treatment for a disease, they all have it. That's apparently not true. Now, in Philly, the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, world-class hospital, top 10 in the country, they've been specializing in blood cancers forever. The gene that causes leukemia is called the Philadelphia gene because it was discovered at Penn. Penn had a treatment for my form of leukemia. The other hospital I was headed toward, less than a mile away from Penn, also world-class hospital, top 50 nationwide, excellent heart and ortho and surgery, no treatment for my form of leukemia. Now, it's a snowy day in December in Philadelphia, and I'm in an ambulance headed for one of those hospitals. Now, the ambulance crew are big guys, but they're fat. They're not fit. They have no problem pushing the gurney around, but I realized that if I fell down, they wouldn't be able to bend over to pick me up. On top of that, I smelled weed. And we're driving on slippery streets, and they're having a ball sliding through intersections. Lots of near misses. And I'm in the back watching these giant oxygen bottles roll around on the floor of this ambulance. Every time we stop, these big tanks roll forward, hit the wall. And when we accelerate, they roll back. Do you know what an oxygen bottle really is? It's a bomb waiting to go off. If it explodes, it has the force of a whole bunch of dynamite, and the tank becomes razor sharp shrapnel, and it happens more than you might think. And it doesn't need to explode. If the valve breaks off, it essentially becomes a torpedo with enough force to punch through the engine block and into a house down the block. Can you tell my brother worked with compressed gases for many years? I've heard all the stories. Anyway, I'm watching these things roll around on the floor while the fat boys, slide through Philadelphia intersections, and a kind of peace came over me. Because I realized I was going to die on the way to the hospital. And then the call came in to take me to Penn. I survived the trip to Satan's own ambulance, and I made it to Penn. They successfully treated me for leukemia, and yes, I will use the word cured. They cured me. And it wasn't until later that I found out that the other hospital had no treatment. And then it all made sense. All of my losing, all of my life, was for a reason. I had been unlucky, statistically unlucky, in defiance of all the odds, but in some great cosmic scheme, I had been saving up all my luck for one roll of the dice, and I won.